Coliseum.
The music that you're listening to, that's Cole Porter's song, You're the Top. It was from 1934. A lot of people know that song, but a lot of people also, what they don't know is that the early version had these lyrics. You're the top, you're the great Houdini, you're the top, you're Mussolini. During the 1920s and 30s, some in the media had an absolute love affair with fascism and Mussolini. We're back with author Robert Galately, the author of Lenin, Stalin, and Hitler. Jonah Goldberg, author of Liberal Fascism. Amity Shlaes, author of The Forgotten Man. And R.J. Pastrito, he is the author of Woodrow Wilson and the Roots of Modern Liberalism. If you watch this show and you ever wonder, how did Glenn Beck ever come up with those 4 books, correct me if I'm wrong, because you've all had individual experiences with me where I've gone, oh my gosh, thank you for your book. These 4 books have been instrumental in shaping my understanding of of history. Okay, I want to go first, and Robert and Amity, I kind of want to go to you guys here on this, on the things that are needed for the breeding ground of fascism. Can it just slowly creep in, or do you need an event, Amity?
Oh, you need an event. You need some fear. You need some hunger, as you said. And I don't see fascism in the past in the U.S. in the way that Jonah does, but I do see statism. And in a way, we look at the crash of '29 as causing the Depression, but the activities of the New Deal were an accident waiting to happen. The progressives of that period were looking for an occasion, a disaster, to act. So I see also a component, someone who wants the government to be bigger and is waiting for an economic crisis.
Hold on just a second. Can you give me full screen number 3, please? Love this one. Rahm Emanuel, you never want a serious crisis to go to a waste. And what I mean by that is an opportunity to do things you think you could not do before.
Well, that's why we all woke up and we heard that quote. The U.S. tends to temper itself, so Congress comes along and says, whoa. That's what happened with President Clinton when the new Republican Congress came in, when he took a look at the bond market. That whoa moment may well yet come now, but the arrogance where you say, I'm going to use my whole progressive agenda on the occasion of this economic crisis, that was something that the New Dealers did.
I want you, please, if you're watching the show today, you got to watch till the end. I'm sorry, that's just the deal. You're trapped unless you leave right now, because you have to understand this in context. And we're going to share the progressive agenda and how the country went off the tracks 100 years ago. Everybody says, oh, Glenn Beck is saying this about Barack Obama. No, I'm not. Teddy Roosevelt, Woodrow Wilson. That's who I'm saying it about. Robert, let me go to you. Let's talk a little bit about, I am very concerned about the money supply, hyperinflation. I had a guy who is, I call him my deep throat. He has been a guy who is very high up and in this whole situation with the banks and the Treasury and the Fed and everything else. And he said to me about a year ago, he said, Glenn, read about the Weimar Republic, because that's what's coming. Whether or not that's true or not, I don't know, but I have read about the Weimar Republic, and there are a lot of similarities on what they did and what we did to the money, and that was one of the real breeding grounds. You want to go into that a little bit?
Well, it really was. I mean, if you look at 1923, we have an inflation which is the greatest inflation in world history. What was a dollar would buy you 4 marks in 1914, let's say at the beginning of the war, now could buy you 2 trillion marks. A loaf of bread would cost you 1 trillion marks. If you wanted to have subsistence living, a family of 4 would cost 500 trillion marks a week. This is the greatest inflation that it's impossible to imagine. You can just contemplate for a moment people who are really honest citizens, people who save their money for their daughter's dowry, for example. They had been long saving, and all the dowry, of course, was completely useless. People who were on fixed incomes, people who had bonds. These bonds were absolutely useless. They had invested in their country, for example, in 1914 or 1916 in a 5,000 mark bond. That 5,000 mark bond now in 1923 wouldn't buy a single match, never mind a package of cigarettes.
Right. Now here's what I'm... Here's where I'm worried, because if this happens, and hopefully it doesn't, but what we're doing now has never been tried and succeeded, of monetizing your own debt without hyperinflation. This is the key here, I think, with Germany, is when the average person felt hopeless, like, wait a minute, I've played by the rules. I've done everything I was supposed to, and now everything I have is worthless. That's when there was real trouble. True or false, Robert?
Well, it's interesting that in 1923, Hitler tried to take power violently in November through a so-called beer hall putsch and on the 9th of November, and this didn't work. There was, in spite of everything, the German people were not willing to give up totally on the Constitution, on the way things were, though none of them very much like the Weimar Republic. The Weimar Republic was a young democracy. It wasn't anchored in the people. They were not happy with the way the war turned out and the way the new democracy was created. So Germany was ready for something in 1923. It seemed Hitler was betting that he could copy Mussolini, what Mussolini had done almost exactly a year before in Rome. He was hoping he could do in Munich. It was a catastrophe. Hitler was captured. The thing fizzled out. They brought in a new currency, and things seemed to go away. Hitler was sent to jail. But what happened is that this was really the first earthquake in Germany. It wiped out the middle classes, the honest, hardworking individuals. The real trouble then came, of course, I know you want to talk about that later, when the Depression hit in 1929, because now you have the second wave, a sort of a second tsunami coming.
Yes.
And this is the one.
And that's what we're going to turn to that here in just a few minutes. Robert, hang on just a second, because we are going to go to the Depression and the parallels here in the Depression and what we need to look out for. But when we come back, if you're an average American, if you're like me, you may have said at some point in your life, how the heck did we get here? How, wait a minute, what's going on with our country? What are they doing in Washington? How did this happen? We're going to take you there. And then I'm also going to show you, not only here, but we've asked R.J. Pastrito to talk a little bit about, in my newsletter, the history of modern progressive, the American progressivism movement. What does that mean? How did it happen? We'll have that in my free email newsletter. You can sign up for it right now at glennbeck.com. It'll happen all next week, so you'll be able to see it for yourself in short bites, and then I invite you to buy all of these people's books, because really, truly, your eyes will be open, and we are not destined to repeat it if we know history. All right, coming up in just a second.